You're joking, right? Clara said, her voice edged with skepticism. She stared at the ancient text her grandmother had handed her, the brittle pages yellowed with age. The candle flickered in the quiet room, casting eerie shadows on the dusty bookshelves. Her grandmother, a woman whose eyes held the wisdom of centuries, simply shook her head. "Read it, Clara," she urged, her voice a gentle nudge towards the words that could shake the very foundation of Clara's world. The first pages spoke of the injustices wrought by men upon women, a historical narrative that Clara had heard in fragments over the years. But as she delved deeper, the anger grew palpable, the pages seemingly soaked in the bitter tears of countless foremothers. The words painted a picture of a world where men were the oppressors, the conquerors, and the destroyers. The seeds of a radical idea took root in Clara's mind as she read on: a world without men, a world where balance could be restored, where justice could reign supreme. Her grandmother passed away a week later, the candle flame of her spirit extinguished by the cold hand of fate. In her grief, Clara found a new purpose in the dusty book. The male doctor who had attended her grandmother's illness was but a symbol of the male-dominated society that had allowed her suffering. The rage boiled within her, and she swore that no other woman would face the same fate. Years passed, and Clara's womb bore witness to the cycle of life and death. For times she felt the flutter of a boy-child within her, only to crush that spark with the cold steel of a scalpel. Each abortion was a declaration of war, a silent scream against the tyranny she had come to despise. The act, once a grim necessity, grew into a twisted sense of power. She felt a strange joy, a macabre triumph with every boy she denied existence. Her daughters grew under her fierce tutelage, each one a reflection of Clara's burning anger. She raised them not just as her offspring, but as soldiers in her secret war, imbuing them with the same fervor that had been passed down through the generations. They were taught from birth that men were the enemy, that the very essence of maleness was toxic. Their nursery rhymes spoke of deceit and destruction. Their bedtime stories were cautionary tales of men's treachery. As they grew, Clara honed their minds and bodies, turning them into agents of change. They were taught the arts of seduction, the subtleties of manipulation, and the cold efficiency of violence. Their training was thorough and unyielding, for Clara knew that to bring about the new world she envisioned, they would need to be more than just weapons. They had to be the embodiment of a revolution. The eldest, Rachel, with her sharp wit and fiery temper, excelled in the art of oration. She could sway a room with her words, turning skeptics into believers with a single speech. In college, she founded a feminist society, a seemingly innocuous club that grew into a beacon for disenchanted young women seeking answers. Rachel's words were like a siren's song, drawing in those who felt the sting of male oppression, whispering sweet nothings of a world where they could be truly free. The second daughter, Leah, was the strategist. Her mind was a chessboard, always thinking 5 moves ahead. Her beauty was a tool, a lure to bring men into their circle, to show them the errors of their ways, and to convince them to either join the cause or become its unwitting pawns. She pursued a doctoral degree in biochemistry, her eyes always on the prize. The youngest, Miriam, was the quiet one, the scientist. Her gentle nature belied a mind as cold and precise as a scalpel. She too pursued biochemistry, her thirst for knowledge insatiable. Together, the 3 of them became a force to be reckoned with, a trifecta of intellect and passion that could not be ignored. On the prestigious university campus, their influence grew like a dark vine, wrapping itself around the very structure of the institution. The sisters' classes grew from mere academic exercises into recruiting grounds for their cause. They sought out those who shared their vision, those who could be molded into the vanguard of the new world. The whispers grew louder, the meetings more secretive, and the stakes higher. Their mother's legacy lived on through them, the book's ancient pages a sacred text that they studied by the light of their dorm room lamps, plotting their path to power. The college buzzed with their presence, a silent revolution fomenting beneath the surface of campus life. They were the harbingers of a gender war, their hearts beating in time with the pulse of history, eager to rewrite it. Rachel's fiery speeches in the student union stirred something primal in the hearts of the young women who gathered to listen. They saw in her the embodiment of their own anger, the voice that could give form to their fears and frustrations. Her words were a call to arms, wrapped in the velvet of sisterhood and liberation. The society grew, a network of whispers and nods that stretched across the campus, weaving through the fabric of student life like a spider's web. Leah, the chess master, worked from the shadows, placing pawns and knights with careful precision. She cultivated relationships with influential faculty members, gaining their trust and subtly steering the curriculum towards their agenda. Her charm was a knife that cut deep, leaving no trace of its blade. Men flocked to her, drawn by her allure, only to find themselves ensnared in her ideological trap. Miriam, the silent genius, toiled in the labs, her eyes glazed with the light of discovery. Her research took on a sinister twist as she delved into the darker corners of biochemistry. The whispers grew into a murmur as rumors of her experiments began to circulate. Her peers looked at her with a mix of awe and fear, knowing she was onto something big, something that could change everything. The sisters' doctoral projects grew more ambitious with each passing semester. Rachel's studies on historical misogyny grew into a thesis on the inherent flaws of the patriarchal structure. Leah's strategic analyses turned into blueprints for social upheaval. But it was Miriam who held the key to their ultimate victory, a biochemical weapon that could target only the Y chromosome, a weapon that could bring the world to its knees. The tension grew palpable as their research neared fruition. The whispers grew into a murmur, then a roar as more and more students caught wind of their plan. The very air on the campus seemed charged with the electricity of imminent change. The university administration, oblivious to the storm brewing within their own hallowed halls, continued with their lives, blissfully unaware that the three young women they had nurtured were about to shake the foundations of society. One by one, they gathered in the university's underground lab, a place where the line between innovation and madness was as thin as a spider's thread. The air was thick with anticipation, the smell of chemicals, a heady perfume that intoxicated them with the promise of power. Rachel's words were a battle cry, Leah's strategies a war plan, and Miriam's discovery the weapon that would bring the enemy to its end. As the final vial of the serum took shape, Clara's ghostly presence seemed to hover over them, her spirit a silent cheer in their ears. They had done it. They had created the means to end the tyranny of men. The weapon was ready. The world was theirs for the taking. But with great power comes great responsibility, and Clara's daughters would soon learn the true cost of wielding it. The moment of truth was upon them, and there was no turning back. They were the instruments of a new world order, a world where the scales of justice would finally tip in favor of the oppressed. The countdown had begun, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. The first reports trickled in, whispers of a strange illness that struck only males. Infants cried out in pain, their tiny forms contorted by agony as their bodies rejected the very essence of their existence. Men young and old fell, their once robust frames now withered and frail, the life force draining from them like the last drops of a river into a desert. The pathogen, a silent and invisible killer, moved with the swiftness of a shadow, leaving no trace but the wake of its destruction. The world looked on in horror, a horror that grew with each passing day as the numbers swelled, filling hospital beds and emptying homes. The panic grew, louder than the cries of the dying. Governments scrambled to understand, to contain, to cure. But the disease was a labyrinth, a maze of genetic code that defied all logic and reason. The medical community was baffled, their best and brightest staring into the abyss of their own ignorance. The world was a stage for the horrors they had unleashed, and the sisters watched from the shadows, their hearts pounding in their chests with a mix of excitement and dread. They had set into motion a chain reaction that could not be stopped, a biological time bomb that ticked away the last moments of male dominion. But as the pathogen spread, so too did the whispers of its origins. The whispers grew into shouts, the shouts into accusations. The authorities began to close in, their net tightening around the secret society that had dared to challenge the natural order. Rachel, Leah, and Miriam knew that the time for secrecy was over. They had to act quickly, to seize control of the narrative before it was too late. The revolution was no longer a distant dream. It was a living, breathing beast that demanded their constant attention. They had to be ready to lead the charge into the future they had created, even if that future was shrouded in the shadows of the past. The sisters stepped into the light, their faces set with the determination of those who have seen the face of destiny. Rachel's voice echoed through the streets, a siren's call to arms for all who had suffered under the yoke of male rule. Leah's plans unfolded like the petals of a deadly flower, each action calculated to maximize the chaos and confusion that reigned. And Miriam, the silent architect of their revolution, watched as her creation wove its deadly dance through the fabric of the world. The pathogen had become their herald, the grim reaper of a new age where women would rise and men would fall. The world was on the brink of a gender apocalypse, and the three sisters stood at the precipice, their hearts beating in unison with the pulse of change. They had lit the fuse, and now they had to navigate the explosion that followed. The winds of fate howled around them, urging them onward, whispering the sweet promise of a world where women could live without fear. But as they looked into the abyss, they had to ask themselves, what kind of world would they build from the ashes of the one they had destroyed? And at what cost to their own humanity? The battle had been waged, and the war was just beginning. The echoes of Clara's words resonated through time, a call to arms that had become a prophecy, a declaration of war that would echo through the annals of history. For the sake of all who came before us and all who will come after, we fight. The day of the announcement dawned, a stark contrast to the dark plot they had hatched in the shadows. Rachel's fiery words were to be broadcast across the globe, a declaration of war that would resonate through the ages. The sisters stood before the cameras, their faces a mask of stoic resolve as they revealed their existence and their purpose. The world watched, transfixed, as Rachel spoke of the injustices of the past, her voice a clarion call to all who had suffered under the tyranny of men. But their triumph was short-lived, for as the final notes of her speech faded into the ether, a cacophony of gunfire rang out, shattering the silence. The camera feed went dark, and the world held its breath. When the screens flickered back to life, The sight that greeted the horrified viewers was one of carnage. Rachel lay in a pool of her own blood, her eyes wide with shock, her voice forever silenced. Leah and Miriam were not far behind, their lifeless bodies a testament to the fury of those they had wronged. The mother's militia had struck, a grieving army fueled by loss and pain. The women who had lost everything to the pathogen's cruel embrace had found their targets, and their vengeance had been swift and brutal. The world reeled from the horror, the reality of the sisters' actions sinking in like a knife twisted in an open wound. In the aftermath, society began to crumble like the walls of a sandcastle under the relentless tide of fate. Hurricanes ravaged cities, tearing down the infrastructure that had been so meticulously built by generations of men. Without their strength to rebuild, to mend the shattered world, the damage grew more severe with each passing storm. The lights flickered and died, the hum of civilization replaced by the mournful wail of the wind. Power outages grew from a nuisance to a nightmare as women struggled to keep the lights on, the water flowing, and the fires of industry stoked. The years rolled by like a slow march towards oblivion. The pathogen continued its relentless march, claiming lives with a cold efficiency that left the survivors gasping for breath. The world grew dimmer, the echoes of laughter and the warmth of companionship fading like the final embers of a dying fire. The sisters had sought to balance the scales of justice, but in their quest for power, they had tipped them too far. The world was now a shadow of its former self, a stark reminder that power, once unleashed, is a beast that cannot be tamed. And as the storm clouds gathered, as the winds of change grew into a maelstrom, the question remained, what would be left when the dust settled, and the final score was tallied? Would it be a world of peace, or one of endless suffering? The answer was blowing in the wind, a whisper that grew into a scream as the tempest of their creation ravaged the earth. The revolution had come, but at what cost? The story of Clara's daughters was one of anger and hope, of love and loss, of power and the price paid for its pursuit. And as the final pages of history were written in the blood of the fallen, the world waited with bated breath for the next chapter to begin. The sperm banks, once bastions of hope, stood empty, their cold metal doors a silent testament to the desperation that had filled their halls. The last vials had been used, the last chances at creating life snuffed out like the final candles in a once blazing cathedral. Cloning was attempted, a desperate grasp at the straws of science, but it proved futile. Each attempt ended in failure, the clones withering away like flowers denied the sun's warmth. The men continued to die, their absence a gaping wound in the fabric of society that no amount of science could heal. The world grew old, the youthful faces of Rachel, Leah, and Miriam fading into the annals of a history they had shaped so dramatically. Life, ever the resilient force, clung to the edges of existence. The last little girls grew, their eyes reflecting the weight of the world upon their shoulders. They played in the ruins of the cities, their laughter a haunting echo of the past. They learned from their mothers, the survivors who had watched the world burn, who had picked through the ashes to find the seeds of knowledge that could sustain them. The whispers of the sisters' names grew into legends, tales of the harbingers of change that were told around campfires that burned with the remnants of the old world. But as they grew into women, the reality of their legacy weighed heavily upon them. They saw the world not as a battleground for the sexes, but as a garden left to wither and die. The joy of sisterhood had been tainted by the bitter fruit of the pathogen, and the taste lingered on their lips like the aftermath of a poisoned kiss. They bore the burden of a future that had been stolen from them, a future where their own daughters would grow old without the warmth of a partner, without the promise of a family. The world grew old, the seasons a solemn procession of decay and rebirth, as the last little girls became the last women. They looked back upon the world that Clara had sought to save and saw only the destruction wrought by her anger. They knew that the time had come to set things right, to find a way to bridge the chasm that had been forged by the actions of their ancestors. And so, they set forth on a new journey, a quest to find the balance that had been lost, to heal the wounds that had never truly closed. The winds of change had become a hurricane. The final journal entry of the last woman on Earth was a testament to the depth of her anger and despair. Her hand trembled as she dipped the pen into the inkwell, the words spilling forth like the tears that stained the pages. She wrote of the love she had never known, the family she had never had, the world that had been denied to her. The words were a declaration of war against the very future that had been stolen from her, a future where the whispers of love and the warmth of family were but distant memories, echoes of a time long past. Her voice was a solitary cry in the wilderness of her own making, a lament for the human race that had been torn asunder by the very hands that had sought to free it. The room around her was a museum of decay, a silent tomb to the civilization that had once thrived. The bookshelves groaned under the weight of dust, the pages of forgotten tomes whispering the secrets of a world that no longer cared. The walls, once adorned with the triumphs of human achievement, were now a canvas for her anger, the paint of her rage splattered across the fading wallpaper. Her eyes, once bright with the fire of revolution, had dimmed to a cold, hard gleam, reflecting the emptiness that had become her reality. She hated everything, the very air she breathed a constant reminder of the failure of her cause. Her hand, gnarled by age and bitterness, held the pen with the fragility of a leaf in a storm. Each stroke of ink was a declaration of defeat, a testament to the futility of her struggle. The words bled onto the page, a confession of her soul's darkest moments. She wrote of the love she had never felt, the children she had never borne, the warmth of a man's embrace that she had never known. Her heart was a frozen wasteland, a desert of regret and anger that had consumed all other feelings. She hated the world, she hated the future, and most of all, she hated herself. The sun set outside, casting a pallid light through the cracked window. She knew her end was near, her body a testament to the relentless march of time. And as she wept, she sobbed her lonely last breath. And with it, the final exhale of all mankind.